Open it!
I used to believe our house was the kind of place where nothing truly unexpected could happen. The kind of place where mornings smelled like coffee and evenings like laundry detergent, where you knew every creak in the floorboards and every draft in the windows. Safety wrapped in beige paint and neatly trimmed hedges. That illusion lasted longer than it should have. The night it cracked, I stood alone in our bedroom closet, staring at the cardboard box on the top shelf. My hand was already reaching for it before I consciously realized what I was doing. The house was silent, too silent, the type of silence that made you aware of your own pulse. It echoed in the room like a quiet accusation. The box looked ordinary. Brown, taped on the edges, no markings except a faint scuff on one corner. But it wasn't ordinary. It was the one thing Emily had ever asked me not to touch. Not suggested, not hinted at, strictly forbidden. Her voice still rang in my head, "Mark, please. Never open that box. Ever." The words had seemed too dramatic at the time, but I'd laughed it off, thinking she was sentimental, maybe embarrassed by old diaries or photos from an awkward phase. That night, though, something about the box felt heavier. As if it wasn't resting on the shelf but on my chest. My fingers brushed the cardboard. The faint scrape of nail against paper was enough to make my breath hitch. What was I expecting? I didn't know. But I felt something shift under my hand, as if the box exhaled. The sound that followed a faint metallic clink inside froze me. Metal? In a box of old things? I drew back my hand but didn't step away. Instead, I whispered, as if the box could hear me, "What are you hiding, Em?" The question wasn't new. It had lived in my mind for months, tapping its fingers against the inside of my skull every time Emily brushed past me with a too bright smile or shut her phone face down on the table. Every time she came home late smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine. Every time she flinched when I suggested cleaning the closet. I lowered the box back onto the shelf without opening it, heart pounding. I shouldn't look inside, shouldn't even think about it. But the forbidden had a gravitational pull, and my suspicions had grown roots long before this night. The hairs on my arm stood up as I turned away from the closet. This was not how the evening was supposed to go. A regular Thursday night, nothing special, nothing dramatic. Emily had left for a late work dinner, the kind she'd been having more frequently over the past year. I stayed home, made a simple dinner, washed dishes, and watched the kind of documentary you put on for background noise. I told myself I wasn't waiting for her, but that was a lie. I always listened for her car in the driveway, for the soft thud of her purse being set down in the hallway. Lately, those sounds felt less like comfort and more like reminders of distance. I left the closet door open and sat on the edge of our bed, elbows on my knees. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 10:38 p.m. Emily's text had come 2 hours earlier, running late. Don't wait. The heart emoji felt like an apology she wasn't ready to say out loud. Or maybe a distraction. I wasn't sure anymore. Something in the closet drew my attention again. Maybe it was the fact that the box wasn't just sitting there, it felt like it was watching me. I stood up and forced myself to close the closet door. It clicked shut with a soft sound that reverberated in my spine. I needed a distraction. I grabbed a glass of water, wandered downstairs, and turned on the living room lights. The house looked the same as always, neat, tasteful, full of Emily's touches. The throw pillow she chose, the candles she loved, the framed photos of her smiling at beaches and family gatherings. Moments that felt honest then, harder to interpret now. When did that shift happen? When had I started questioning everything? A car drove past outside, headlights sliding across the living room wall, and I flinched before realizing it wasn't her. Not yet. I took my phone from the counter. No messages. I checked again anyway. Nothing. My reflection stared back at me in the dark kitchen window, a tired face with faint lines that had deepened over the past year. I used to tell myself aging was natural. Now I wondered how much of it came from doubt. I returned upstairs, drawn back to the closet as if pulled by strings. I opened the door again. The box still sat there, innocent in its stillness. I stepped closer, studying it with a new curiosity. How had I gone years without questioning it? Maybe I trusted Emily too much. Maybe I trusted myself too little. My mind drifted to the first time she mentioned it. We were packing to move into this house, both covered in dust from our old apartment. Emily had grabbed the box from her childhood home and set it in a corner, shielding it instinctively when I reached to help. "Not this one," she said too quickly. "Please don't ever open it, okay? It's private." I'd smiled back then and said, "Okay, I trust you." Funny how trust can feel like both a promise and a blindfold. My eyes stayed fixed on the box, and something inside me whispered, "You're not imagining this. Something is wrong. Something has been wrong." A faint sound behind me made me turn. Not a loud noise, just the house settling, but I was startled anyway. My nerves were stretched thin, pulled taut like a wire. I took a slow breath. I needed clarity, not paranoia. But clarity felt out of reach, as if it was deliberately stepping back every time I tried to approach it. I leaned into the doorframe, rubbing the back of my neck. The sense of being watched didn't fade. It wasn't fear exactly, more like anticipation. Like the moment before a storm breaks. I didn't open the box that night. I closed the closet once more, locked the feeling away with it, and lay in bed waiting for Emily to return. When she finally came home a little past midnight, the sound jolted me awake instantly. The front door opened softly, followed by the muted rustling of her coat. I listened to her footsteps on the stairs light, careful, almost hesitant. She pushed open the bedroom door with a whisper of hinges. "Hey," she said in a quiet voice, surprised to find me awake. "Why aren't you asleep?" I studied her in the dim light. Her hair was slightly tousled, makeup faded but still present. She smelled faintly of perfume, not the one she normally wore. My chest tightened. "I was waiting for you," I said, trying to keep my tone even. She froze just a fraction of a second. "Oh, you didn't have to." I watched her walk to the bathroom, the light spilling out for a moment before the door clicked shut. I listened to the water running and wondered why something as simple as washing her hands felt like another secret. When she came out, she moved to her side of the bed, sliding under the covers. I could tell she was tired or pretending to be. She turned her back to me, murmuring a faint goodnight. I lay awake long after her breathing grew steady. In the dark, I pictured the box again. And something inside whispered to me that whatever was hidden there wasn't just old memories. It was something that could break the life we'd built if I chose to see it. Morning came too fast. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting pale lines across the bedroom floor. Emily was already up by the time I opened my eyes. I heard her humming softly downstairs, the clatter of a mug against the counter. For a moment, it felt like a normal morning. Then her voice called up the stairs, bright and easy, as if the night had never existed. "Mark? Coffee ready." I dressed slowly, replaying the faint metallic sound from inside the box. That noise had nested in my mind and refused to leave. When I came downstairs, Emily handed me a mug and smiled. Too big. Too rehearsed. Her eyes avoided mine just slightly. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked. "Fine," I lied. She nodded, setting her own mug down. "I have a busy day. A team meeting, then I need to prepare for an event. I might be home late again." Something in my expression made her add quickly, "I'll try not to be too late." I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to say, "Why are you avoiding me?" Or "Who were you with last night?" But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched her gather her things in a hurriedly, phone, a scarf she almost forgot. Her movements were nervous, abrupt. Before she headed to the door, she paused, glanced upstairs, and then looked at me. "You didn't go through anything in the closet, right?" The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. Too pointed. Too specific. "No," I said slowly. "Should I have?" She shook her head quickly, relief flashing too visibly across her face. No. Just checking. She left in a swirl of perfume and forced cheer. The door closed behind her, and I stood alone in our quiet kitchen, the echo of her words still ringing in the air. Something in me shifted then. A realization, heavy and unwelcome: Emily wasn't just protecting a box. She was protecting a secret. The house felt emptier than usual as I walked upstairs. My hand hovered over the closet door again, feeling the same pull, the same strange electricity in my fingertips. I opened the door and stared at the top shelf. The box waited silently, as if it knew I'd be back. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But in that moment, I understood one thing with absolute clarity: whatever was inside wasn't going to stay hidden forever. Not with the way my mind kept circling around it. And for the first time, I was ready not to open the box, but to admit that Emily, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had a part of her life she never intended to share with me. A part that lived inside that plain cardboard box. A part that was already unraveling everything we had. The thing about doubt is that it never arrives politely. It does not knock and wait to be invited in. It slips under the door, settles in the corners, and then one day you look around and realize it lives in every room. That is what the next few days felt like, moving through a house that was the same in layout, but different in atmosphere, as if someone had changed the air without my permission. At first, I tried to pretend nothing had shifted. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings where people argued about deadlines and budgets. I nodded at the right moments, took notes, even cracked a joke or two. On the surface, I was the same person I had always been: Mark Hanley, dependable, composed, safe. Inside, my attention kept slipping away like water through fingers, returning again and again to a plain cardboard box sitting on the top shelf of our closet. I told myself I was overreacting. Plenty of people had private things. Letters from old friends, mementos from their younger years, photos they were too embarrassed to show their partner. Maybe I had built a mountain out of a noise: a single metallic clink in a quiet room, a single two-pointed question at breakfast. But every time I tried to calm myself with rational explanations, something small would happen to push me back toward that shelf. Like the way Emily's phone never seemed to leave her hand anymore. One evening, 3 days after that night in the closet, we were sitting in the living room pretending to watch a show. The television murmured in front of us, scenes changing, characters talking, but neither of us was following. I could feel the distance between us more than I could see it. Emily sat at the other end of the couch, her legs tucked under her, phone lying screen down on her knee. Every few minutes, it buzzed. She picked it up quickly each time, angling her body away, thumbs moving fast. Then she would set it back down face down, smile at the screen as if she were still invested in whatever the characters were doing, and ask some neutral question like, "Do you think we should repaint the kitchen this year?" Her words floated in the air and fell without weight. After the third or fourth buzz, I said, lightly, "Popular tonight, huh?" She glanced at me, then away. "Just work stuff. They're finalizing the schedule for next month's events." Boring. Her tone was casual, but the way she locked the screen before setting the phone down again didn't match the word boring. I forced a smile. "You can mute it if you want. We can finish this later." "It's fine," she said quickly. "It'll stop soon." It didn't. The show ended, and I could not recall a single scene. Emily stood, stretched, and announced she was going to bed early. She kissed my cheek, a soft brush that felt automatic, then scooped up her phone and went upstairs without waiting for me. I stayed in the living room, sitting in the dim light of the paused television, listening to the faint sounds from above. Footsteps. Drawers opening. The tap of a closet door. I pictured her standing in front of that shelf, looking at the box, maybe checking if it had been moved. The thought made my chest tighten. I did not follow her right away. I told myself I wanted to clear my head first, to give my thoughts room to slow down. Instead, they spun faster. Had I always been this blind? Or had things truly changed only recently? I tried to remember the last time Emily had laughed without effort, the last time she had touched me without seeming distracted. Eventually, I climbed the stairs. The bedroom lights were off, the room lit only by the glow from the hall. Emily was already in bed, facing away, phone dark on the nightstand. I stood there for a moment, watching her back rise and fall. There was a time when that sight alone made me feel calm. Tonight, it felt like looking at a stranger who had borrowed my wife's silhouette. "Is everything okay?" I asked softly. "Just tired," she murmured, not turning. "Long day." I thought about mentioning the texts, the way she had guarded her phone, the question at breakfast about the closet. I thought about saying, "Tell me what's going on." Instead, I swallowed it all and said, "Yeah. Long day." The next morning, as I was tying my shoes by the front door, I heard her call from the bedroom upstairs, a hint of tension in her voice. "Mark?" "Yeah?" I answered, straightening. "Did you move anything in the closet?" "My side?" My heartbeat stumbled. "No." "Why?" A pause. Too long. I thought I wouldn't mind. Maybe I'm imagining things. "It's nothing." Her footsteps crossed the floor. For a moment I considered going back up, but I stayed where I was, staring at the neat row of shoes by the door. My own pair, Emily's flats, her running shoes. Domestic order, lined up like evidence that our life was exactly what it seemed. That day at work, I found myself opening our shared calendar more than usual. It was an old habit now, the way we coordinated schedules, dropped in dinner with friends or dentist appointments or Emily work events. I scrolled through the coming weeks. There were several evening entries marked client dinner under her name, as there had been more often lately. I tried not to let my thoughts go where they wanted to go. "You are going to make yourself see things that are not there," I told myself. "You need facts, not feelings." But the problem with feelings is that they insist on interpreting every fact. A few nights later, we were getting ready for bed, moving in parallel lines that almost intersected but never quite did. I brushed my teeth. Emily scrolled through her phone. I changed into an old t-shirt. She closed the bedroom window. The routine was familiar enough to be comforting, and unfamiliar enough to be unsettling. As I walked around to my side of the bed, I felt something under my sock, a small, hard object near the edge of the mattress. I bent down, fingers searching under the bed frame, expecting to pull out a water bottle cap or a lost pen. My hand closed around something cold and smooth. I drew it out carefully. It was a keychain. A small rectangle of brushed metal with a logo etched into it. Not one I recognized immediately, but it had a professional look, the kind of polished design used by companies for branding. The edges were rounded, and a tiny groove at the bottom suggested it had once held a key. I turned it in my hand, watching the light catch on the engraved symbol. I knew it was not mine. I did not collect keychains, had never seen this one before, and it definitely did not match the set I kept in the bowl by the front door. "Emily," I said slowly, my voice sounding different to my own ears. She looked up from her phone. "Yeah?" I held up the keychain. "Is this yours?" Her eyes flicked to it, then away just as quickly. "Where did you find that?" "Under the bed." "Oh." She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "It must have fallen out of my bag or something." "From where?" I asked, more curious than accusing. At least, that was what I told myself. She hesitated. "One of the caterers from work. They had a promotion at the last event. They were giving away things like that. I must have grabbed one and forgotten about it." Her explanation could have been true. It was plausible. People forgot free items all the time. But her voice had a tightness to it, a strain around the edges, like a string pulled too hard. I examined the logo again. "What company?" She shifted on the bed. "I don't remember the name, honestly." "Something local." She reached out. "Can I see it?" I placed it in her palm. She closed her fingers quickly, as though she were worried I might change my mind and take it back. She stood, walked over to her dresser, and placed the keychain inside the top drawer, sliding it shut more firmly than necessary. "That's where it should have been," she said with a small, brittle laugh. "I'm such a mess lately." She turned back toward me, searching my face for something. Doubt. Suspicion. Maybe permission to drop the subject. "You're not a mess," I said automatically. It came out flat. Her smile faded a little. "What's going on, Mark?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You've been different." She crossed her arms loosely, hugging herself. "Quieter. More distant." Did I do something? Too many answers rushed to my tongue at once, clogging the path. Yes, I wanted to say. You did a lot of small things that together feel like one enormous thing. Instead I shrugged. Just tired. Work's been a lot. She studied me for another second, then nodded as if deciding to accept that answer. Okay. If you say so. We went to bed. Her back faced me again. I stared at the ceiling, the faint outline of the fan blades above us. Underneath us, the spot where I'd found the keychain seemed to glow in my mind, a tiny beacon of unease. That keychain alone might not have meant much. But it did not exist in isolation. It floated into a sea of other details, late nights, guarded texts, a cardboard box on the top shelf that carried the weight of something unspoken. The next day, on my lunch break, I found myself searching for the logo on my phone in the parking lot outside my office. It took only seconds to find the company, a small but upscale automotive service business in a nearby town. High-end repairs, glossy website, photos of polished cars in spotless bays. My stomach dropped when I saw the address. It was the same town Emily had mentioned more than once in passing when talking about client meetings. Of course, there were reasonable explanations. Maybe her company held an event there. Maybe they had partnered with that service business. Maybe the logo on the keychain had nothing to do with her recent late nights and everything to do with a forgettable promotional table. But my mind was no longer interested in reasonable explanations. It wanted patterns. I zoomed in on a photo of the reception area. There were keychains just like the one I'd found, lined up in a shallow wooden bowl on the counter. The caption underneath mentioned complimentary gifts for loyal customers. I locked my phone, pressing my thumb against the screen a little harder than necessary. I knew I had just discovered something small, maybe even harmless on its own. Still, it felt like a thread. And once you see a loose thread, it is hard to resist pulling. For the rest of the day, the world around me seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume. People spoke, I responded. Screens lit up, I typed. But my real attention stayed fixed on that thread, on the drawer where Emily had placed the keychain, on the box sitting quietly above our heads at night. That evening, when I returned home, Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Music played softly from her phone, a cheerful playlist she'd always used when cooking. It should have felt familiar. Instead, it felt staged. "Hey," she said, looking up with practiced warmth. "How was your day?" "Busy," I answered. One word, two meanings. She tilted her head. "You really need a vacation." "Maybe," I said. Then, after a moment, "How about you? How was your day?" "Oh, you know," she said, shifting her attention back to the cutting board. "Meetings, emails, dealing with last-minute changes. This new client is demanding." There was a pause where I could have asked, "Which client? Where are they based? Do they drive very expensive cars?" Instead, I swallowed the questions again. The space between what I felt and what I said grew wider. Halfway through dinner, as we sat at the table pretending everything was fine, her phone chimed from the countertop. She froze for a fraction of a second, then forced herself to take another bite before getting up with forced nonchalance. "I'll just check if it's work," she said, already reaching for the device. I watched her unlock it, I skimming quickly over the screen. Her lips pressed together. She typed something fast, then cleared the notification and returned to the table. Is everything okay? I asked. Yeah, she said with a small nod. Just a change to tomorrow's schedule. Another late night? Probably, she said lightly. But it's temporary. Once this project is over, things will calm down. There it was again, a vague future where everything would make sense and our discomfort would be retroactively justified by success. I used to believe in that future easily. Now it felt like a story told to a child to get them to sleep. Later, after we had cleaned up and settled in the bedroom, Emily headed to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closet. The door was slightly ajar, a dark rectangular opening in the dim room. I stood and crossed the space before I even realized I'd moved. The closet smelled faintly of laundry detergent and perfume. My clothes hung in a neat row on the left, hers on the right, blouses, dresses, jackets arranged by color. The carpeted floor felt soft under my feet. Above, on the top shelf, the box waited, still and unassuming. I stared at it for a long moment. My hand rose halfway, hesitated, then dropped. The memory of Emily's voice rolled through my mind again. Never open that box. Ever. At the time, I'd thought it was a silly, dramatic way to protect some embarrassing teenage secrets. Now the words sounded different. Less dramatic, more desperate. I stepped closer, squinting at the edges. The tape looked old but intact. There were faint indentations on the lid where something inside occasionally shifted, like the memory of that metallic sound. No label, no writing, nothing to hint at what lay inside. Mark? Emily's voice from behind me made me flinch. I turned too quickly, almost knocking against a row of shirts. She stood in the doorway, towel around her shoulders, hair damp. Her eyes went immediately to the shelf above my head. "What are you doing?" she asked, and this time the lightness was gone. "Looking for my blue sweater," I said evenly. "I thought it might have ended up here." Her gaze lingered on the box, then returned to my face. "Did you move anything?" "No," I said. It wasn't quite a lie. My hand hadn't touched the cardboard. My thoughts had done all the moving. Her shoulders relaxed a little. "It's not here," she said, stepping aside. I saw it downstairs on the back of the chair. "Right," I murmured. I must have forgotten. We went to bed in a silence that was thicker than usual. I lay on my back, eyes closed, listening to the small sounds beside me, her breathing, the shift of fabric when she turned, the subtle change in rhythm that told me she was still awake. "Mark," she said quietly into the darkness. "Yeah? Do you trust me?" The question dropped between us like a stone into water. If she had asked me that a year ago, I would have answered without hesitation. Now, my trust felt like a delicate glass I could not hold up to the light without seeing cracks. "Yes," I said automatically. The sound of it surprised me. She was silent for a moment. "You sure?" I could have said, "I want to." I could have said, "I am trying." Instead, I repeated, "Yes." Another pause. "Good," she whispered. "Because I need that right now." We lay there, neither of us sleeping. Her words circled my mind like a slow-moving current. She needed my trust. For what? To carry the weight of some temporary confusion? Or to cover something far more permanent? The days that followed blurred together, but the feeling did not. It sharpened. A week later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I found the second unexpected object. Emily had left for a yoga class. The house was warm with sunlight, dust motes drifting in the rays that cut across the hallway. I was changing the sheets in the bedroom, tugging the fitted sheet off the mattress. As I lifted one corner, my fingers brushed against something tucked just inside the frame, between the slats and the mattress edge. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a small ticket stub, folded once down the middle. The paper was worn, edges softened from friction. A faint scent of something sweet clung to it, maybe perfume or the ghost of a crowded place. I unfolded it carefully. A concert ticket. A band I knew Emily liked but I definitely did not. 2 weeks ago, Friday night. The same night she had told me she was working late at the office, finalizing a proposal. My eyes lingered on the printed details: venue, seat number, date. Then they caught on the faint shadow of ink on the back, as if someone had pressed a pen there while writing on another surface. I flipped it over. On the reverse side, in slanted handwriting that was not mine, a short line was scrawled. "Next time, we get closer to the stage." My thumb traced the words. They were casual, almost friendly. But in the context of everything else, they felt like a spark near dry kindling. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the ticket fluttering in my hand. My mind replayed that night. Emily came home late, apologizing for the long day, saying her team had stayed late to go over numbers. Her shoulders were tense, she said she was exhausted. I believed her. I had even offered to rub her neck. She had smiled, thanked me, and said she just needed sleep. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I closed my eyes, steadying myself with a deep breath. The keychain. The ticket. The guarded phone. The questions about the closet. The box. Individually, they could all be explained away. Coincidence. Stress. Harmless. Together, they formed a shape I could no longer pretend not to see. I stood and walked to the closet one more time. The door creaked softly as I opened it. The box waited where it always did, in its quiet, ordinary position. But nothing about it felt ordinary now. It felt like the center of a web, every new discovery pulling another thread toward it. I did not reach for it. Not yet. My hand curled and uncurled at my side. Soon, I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. Soon I'm going to find out. For the first time, the thought of opening that box did not just fill me with fear. It felt like an inevitability. There are moments in life that feel strangely suspended, as if the world has taken a quiet breath before moving on. The morning Emily left for her 2-day work trip felt exactly like that. A stillness settled over the house the moment her car disappeared down the street, an almost physical quiet that pressed gently against my ears. I stood by the living room window longer than necessary, watching the space where her taillights had been. A part of me expected her to turn around, walk back inside, and ask why I looked so tense. But she didn't. She drove away with a bright wave and a practiced smile, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and a silence I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I turned away from the window slowly and looked around the house as if seeing it for the first time. The furniture, the photos on the walls, the books on the shelves, they all seemed to hold their breath with me. Today was the day. I didn't decide it consciously. The decision had been growing quietly, like a shadow stretching across the floor as the sun moved. It had been waiting for the moment when excuses no longer made sense, when doubt outweighed fear. I walked upstairs at a measured pace, each step slow and deliberate. In the hallway, I paused and listened. The house was completely still. Not a pipe groaned, not a floorboard creaked. It was as if the house, too, knew what I was about to do. When I pushed open the bedroom door, the air inside felt slightly cooler. I crossed to the closet without turning on the light, guided by memory. I opened the door. There it was. The box sat exactly where it always had, tucked back on the high shelf, looking almost harmless in its stillness. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart thudding steadily in my chest. I half expected the box to look different, somehow changed after weeks of haunting my thoughts. But it was the same plain cardboard container it had always been. I reached up. My fingertips brushed the rough surface. I pulled back instinctively, nerves prickling. For a moment I just stood there, breathing slowly. You already made the choice, I murmured to myself. Stop pretending you haven't. And then, with a breath I didn't realize I was holding, I grabbed the box with both hands and lifted it down. It was heavier than I expected. Not overwhelmingly so, but dense. The weight surprised me, like lifting a suitcase filled with something you never intended to pack. I knelt on the carpet, placed the box on the floor, and sat back on my heels. For several long moments, I simply stared at it. My mind drifted through memories of Emily's face whenever I walked near the closet. Her sudden stiffness. Her carefully casual tone. Her attempts to redirect. And then the moment she froze when I found the keychain. All those tiny moments gathered around me now, resting their hands on my shoulders. I slid my fingers under the tape lid and peeled it back. A soft crackle filled the quiet room as the tape separated from the cardboard. I lifted the lid. Inside the box, everything was arranged with meticulous care, forming neat rows and layered sections. Tissue paper separated some layers, folded with almost delicate precision. It was not a collection assembled in haste. It was intentional. Thoughtful. Repeated. My breath caught slightly. The first thing I noticed was the keychain I thought Emily had taken from the drawer. But this one was a different color, slightly scuffed. A twin, or perhaps the original. It lay on top of a small bundle wrapped in a thin, worn cloth. Around it were other items, small, distinct, unmistakable. I lifted the keychain between my fingers. Metal, slightly warm from the room, with a faint scratch along one side. The same logo as the one I'd seen online from the automotive workshop. The realization washed over me slowly, not as a burst of shock but as a steady confirmation of what I already suspected. I set it aside gently and reached for the cloth. It unfolded easily under my hands, revealing a collection of small objects, a concert wristband with faded lettering, a folded napkin with a restaurant logo I recognized, a pen with the name of a consulting firm, the kind companies hand out at corporate events. None of the items were romantic in the traditional sense. No love letters, no obvious sentimental tokens. Just everyday objects, mundane things that could have been picked up anywhere. Yet together, arranged so deliberately, they formed a quiet confession. My throat tightened. I removed another layer of tissue. Beneath it were more items, grouped in small clusters held together by rubber bands. In each bundle, there were 3 or 4 pieces that belonged together in some way, a ticket stub and a guitar pick, a branded coffee sleeve and a business card, a parking garage receipt and a lanyard. Every cluster felt like a snapshot of a day, a moment spent with someone who wasn't me. I picked up one of the ticket stubs. The date was from last year. I flipped it over. A faint smudge of ink had bled into the paper from the backside of the ticket, as if someone had placed it on top of a notepad and written over it. A ghost of handwriting. Not mine. The more I looked, the more the box felt like a story written in fragments, one I had never been allowed to read until now. It didn't shout. It whispered. It whispered in detail, in patterns, in the quiet arrangement of things that should never have been kept. I inhaled deeply and sifted through another layer. This time, something metallic clinked softly against another object, pulling my attention. I reached in and found a small silver badge from a corporate office building, a temporary visitor pass. The laminate was scratched on the edges, as if it had been kept in a pocket. A name had been written in thick marker, but the writing was smudged. Still legible. T. Reeves. My stomach tightened. I put the badge down with care and rubbed my hands together, trying to gather myself. My pulse beat at the base of my neck, subtle but insistent. The next item I picked up was a folded piece of paper with a handwritten note on the inside. The handwriting was small, neat, slanted slightly right. Not my wife's. Not mine. I scanned it. Dinner at 7. Same place as last time. Wear the blue one. The words were simple, ordinary, even mundane. But the familiarity in their tone, the casual expectation they carved a small, targeted ache inside me. I folded the note back slowly, smoothing the edge with my thumb. I wasn't angry yet. Not exactly. Anger hadn't found its way through the fog of disbelief. Instead, a quiet heaviness settled in my chest. Not explosive. Not violent. Just final. I reached deeper into the box and felt something soft, like fabric. I lifted a thin scarf, dark grey, patterned subtly. I held it up and stared at it, trying to recall if I'd ever seen Emily wear it. I hadn't. And yet, here it was. The scent was faint laundered, maybe, or simply old. I folded it and placed it aside. I continued through the box for almost an hour, each new layer revealing more pieces of lives I hadn't known crossed with mine. Some items were older, judging by the dates on tickets or the faded ink on receipts. Others were shockingly recent. Near the bottom of the box, tucked between two layers of neatly folded tissue, I found something that made my breath stop completely. A small paper bracelet, the kind event staff use. The date printed on it was less than a month old. 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. The same week Emily told me she had to stay after work to handle an urgent deadline. 3 weeks ago, I made her spaghetti for dinner. I had waited until almost midnight before giving up and eating alone. When she came home, she said she was tired, too tired to eat. She touched my cheek gently, thanked me for the dinner she didn't try, and went straight to bed. 3 weeks ago, she wore a bracelet like this one somewhere I wasn't. I set the bracelet down very slowly. Something in me shifted then, not violently, not like a sudden break, but like snow cracking underfoot. A quiet, decisive fracture. I reached for the final layer of tissue, knowing I had to see everything. Knowing I couldn't turn away now. When I uncovered the last items, I found something that chilled me far more than any receipt or badge could have. A photo. Folded twice, creased at the edges, a candid shot taken in what looked like a casual restaurant. The lighting was warm, the background blurred. Emily sat at a table, laughing freely, head tilted slightly. Her eyes were bright, the kind of brightness I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Across the table from her sat a man. I didn't know him. Not from this angle. His face was half-turned, smiling at something she had said. His posture was relaxed, familiar. Like he belonged there. My fingers tightened on the photo before I forced myself to relax. I studied his shape, broad shoulders, short hair, and a watch on his wrist. Nothing distinctive enough to identify him. Just enough to know he was real. I placed the photo aside carefully. Then I closed the box. Not because I was done with it, but because I had reached the limit of what my mind could absorb in one sitting. The room around me felt different now, tilted, unfamiliar. The carpet under my knees felt thicker than before. Even the light coming through the curtain seemed to settle differently on the floor. I sat back slowly, breathing through a tightness I hadn't noticed building in my chest. The air felt thin, as if the room wasn't large enough to hold everything inside my head. The box remained in front of me, closed but no longer secret. I touched the lid with the tips of my fingers, feeling the slight give of the cardboard. This wasn't guesswork anymore. Not suspicion. Not imagination. It was truth. Truth in the form of everyday objects kept like keepsakes. Truth laid out in careful order, telling a story Emily had chosen not to tell me. I stayed in that position for a long time, staring at the closed box, letting the reality of it settle around me. Eventually, I stood and placed the box gently on the floor beside the bed. I didn't put it back on the shelf. I couldn't. It no longer belonged there. It didn't belong anywhere that suggested normalcy or trust or shared space. When I left the room, I didn't look back. But as I walked down the stairs, a thought formed quietly, calmly, with the weight of certainty. Whatever came next, whatever answers I needed to find, whatever truth lay behind each object in that box opening, it had been the first step. There was no going back now. There is a strange clarity that comes after discovering something you were never meant to know. For hours after opening the box, my mind didn't scatter the way I expected. Instead, every thought felt sharp, focused, as if someone had cleaned a fogged window inside my head. The world outside remained the same. Birds sang on the branches outside the bedroom window, cars passed down the street, the neighbor's dog barked at the mail truck, but inside me, something quiet and steady had settled. The box had told me a story. Not the full story, not yet, but enough pieces to begin forming a shape. And the shape pointed outward toward people, places, and conversations waiting to happen. By the next morning, I already had a plan forming in the background of my mind. Not a complete plan, not even organized, but a direction. A path I would need to walk, step by step, even if each step felt heavier than the last. The first thread was the automotive service shop's logo engraved on the keychain I'd found under the bed. A coincidence? Maybe once. But finding a second keychain in the box, scuffed and clearly older, erased that possibility. So I drove there. It was a bright weekday morning, the kind that should have felt light, but everything inside me felt weighted. The road stretched ahead in a blur of familiar landmarks I didn't register. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, but I could feel a quiet tension sitting on my shoulders, like a coiled spring. The automotive shop was about 20 minutes away, tucked into a commercial strip next to a small diner and a hardware store. I pulled into the lot and parked, letting the engine idle for a moment as I stared at the building. The sign looked exactly like it had on their website: sleek lettering, polished chrome logo. A small row of potted plants by the entrance softened the otherwise utilitarian appearance. I stepped out of the car and took a slow breath before heading inside. The reception area was spotless, shining countertops, leather chairs in a neat row, a small fridge with bottled water free for customers. A bowl of keychains sat next to the computer monitor, identical to the ones I'd found. A woman behind the counter smiled as I approached. "Hi there. How can I help you?" Her friendliness felt almost jarring compared to the knot in my stomach. I returned the smile as best I could. "Just looking to get an estimate." "Something's been making a noise when I turn." "A noise?" she asked. "Could be a few things. One of our guys can take a look." She turned her head and called toward the back, "Jason, can you come up front?" My pulse jumped. Jason. The name appeared twice in the box on a folded napkin with his initials scribbled near the corner, and on the backside of a small event wristband where someone had scrawled "Great Night." Jay, the man who stepped out from the garage, had the kind of presence that filled a room even before he spoke. Tall, broad-shouldered, hands marked by years of mechanical work. His hair was cut short, and he wore a dark grey uniform with his name embroidered on the chest. His face held the easy confidence of someone who had been told all his life he was charming, and who had come to believe it. He approached the counter, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What's the issue?" He asked it without looking directly at me, still glancing down at the tablet in his hand. When he finally raised his eyes, I watched his expression carefully. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his face. Recognition? Surprise? A momentary tension? "I'm hearing a clicking sound when I turn the wheel," I said, my voice steady. "Thought I'd see if it was anything serious." He nodded. "We can take a quick look." He walked past me, gesturing for me to follow. As he stepped out into the parking area, I studied his posture. Relaxed. Confidence. But when he glanced back over his shoulder to check if I was following, his eyes carried a hint of something I couldn't place. We stopped by my car. "Pop the hood?" he asked. I did. He leaned in, poking around with practiced hands. "Nothing obvious," he said after a moment. "Turn the engine on and give the wheel a turn slowly." I sat inside and did as he instructed. The clicking noise echoed faintly, though I knew I had exaggerated it. It wasn't really why I was here. Jason straightened and leaned down to my open window. Could be a joint starting to wear down. Hard to say without a full inspection. "Is that something you've seen before?" I asked casually. His expression softened into a slight smile. "I've seen everything." The way he said it made something twist in my chest. I got out of the car again, walking around to stand near him. "I think my wife's brought her car here before," I said. "Emily Hanley?" His reaction was immediate, though too subtle for someone who wasn't looking for it. A flick of the eyes, a slight stiffening in his shoulders, and then a perfectly crafted neutral expression. "Emily?" he repeated, pretending to search his memory. "Yeah, that sounds familiar. We get a lot of customers, though." I nodded slowly. "Sure. Just thought I'd ask. She said you guys do good work." Another flicker in his eyes. He cleared his throat. Want me to schedule you for a full inspection? Won't take long. I hesitated, watching him carefully. He felt like someone wearing a mask, thin but deliberate. I had no proof of anything yet, just a box full of quiet clues. But standing in front of him, I felt a certainty settle into place. A certainty that he knew exactly who my wife was. That's okay, I said. I think I'll hold off for now. He nodded once, professionally, but his expression didn't fully relax until I got back into my car. As I pulled away, I glanced at the mirror. He was watching me leave. I drove to a nearby diner, parked, and stared at the steering wheel for several minutes. My breath came slow and measured, the way it does when your mind is working faster than your heartbeat wants it to. I opened my phone and scrolled through the photos I had taken of the box. The keychains. The notes. The objects that carried fingerprints from someone I hadn't expected to meet. Seeing Jason in person made the threads pull tighter. But it was only the first thread. The next came from the corporate badge I'd found with the name T. Reeves. I remembered Emily mentioning once, offhandedly, a coworker named Tom, someone she said was great at presentations and very funny. I didn't know his full name then. Now I did. That afternoon, I drove to the building listed on the badge. It was a sleek, glass front office complex with a landscaped courtyard. The kind of place where people walked with coffee cups and ID badges clipped to their belts. I parked in the visitor lot and made my way inside. The lobby was airy, filled with natural light. A receptionist sat at a long desk, typing quickly. I approached with a calm I didn't quite feel. "Hi," I said. "I'm here to meet with Tom Reeves." The name felt strange in my mouth, like a foreign word I'd learned phonetically. The receptionist looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he knows my wife," I said. "She works in events. I'm dropping something off for her." This was not entirely false, though not entirely true either. The receptionist checked her computer. "He's on the second floor," she said. "I'll let him know you're here." She picked up the phone and spoke quietly into it. A minute later, she pointed toward a set of elevators. "You can go up. He'll meet you by the conference room." As the elevator rose, I felt the faint hum through my shoes. The doors opened to a hallway lined with offices and glass dividers. People walked past me without looking up. At the end of the hallway, a man stood waiting. He was younger than Jason's early 30s, with neatly kept hair and a pressed shirt. He looked like the type who ironed his clothes even on weekends. When he saw me, confusion crossed his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, adjusting the badge clip to his belt. "Tom?" I asked. "Yes. I'm Mark." I paused, letting my name linger in the space between us. "Emily's husband." His reaction was much stronger than Jason's. His eyes widened. His jaw tightened. His hand resting casually on the back of a chair shifted with a subtle nervousness. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for the right expression. "Oh," he finally said. "Yes. Emily." "Of course." "Hi." The stilted greeting was almost painful. I nodded once, studying him. "She mentioned you." He blinked. "She did?" "Yes. Said you two worked together." A muted flush rose to his face. "Right. Yes. We've done a few projects together." He sounded like someone trying very hard to keep their breathing even. I kept my tone neutral. "She left something in my car last time she was at the office. Figured she'd need it. Thought I'd drop by while I was in the area." A pause. His eyes shifted, not wildly, but enough. I could see him thinking, calculating. "Was she at the office yesterday?" he asked, too casually. I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He shrugged quickly. "Just curious." I allowed a small smile, one that did not reach my eyes. I'm not keeping track of her schedule. Something tightened in his posture. A subtle pull inward, like a defensive reflex. I let silence stretch for a moment, then said, "Well, just wanted to say hello, since Emily talks about work so much." He nodded too fast. "Right. That's nice of you." His voice carried a tremor he probably hoped I couldn't detect. Before he could say anything more, I excused myself. "Good seeing you." He forced a polite smile. "You too." As I walked back down the hallway, I could feel his eyes on my back long after I turned the corner. Outside in the fresh air, I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled just a little, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that both men had reacted exactly the way I feared they would. With recognition. With tension. With something unsaid. I got back into my car and leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. I replayed both encounters, the subtle tells in their expressions, the careful neutrality in their voices. These were not random men. These were men who knew my wife. And not in the way coworkers or service employees know someone. Their reactions were too personal, too guarded, too aware of the name Emily. I reached for the folder I had brought, a collection of printed screenshots and photos of items from the box. I spread them on the passenger seat. Each item connected to someone. Each someone connected to a part of Emily's life she'd kept locked away. A pang went through my chest, not sharp but slow, like a bruise forming. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even anger. It was grief. Grief for the version of my life I thought was real. Grief for the trust one had believed was mutual. Grief for the small pieces of my marriage that now felt like artifacts buried under the weight of the box upstairs. But grief didn't stop me. It didn't even slow me down. If anything, it made me more determined. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. I didn't know exactly where I was going next. Maybe home. Maybe a quiet place to think. But I knew the direction wasn't turning back. The road ahead felt uncertain, but certainty lived in one truth: I had taken the first steps into a story Emily had never intended me to see. And now that I had started piecing it together, I wasn't going to stop. Not until I knew everything. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty at all. It feels crowded, filled with everything you don't want to admit, everything you can't unsee, everything you're too afraid to say out loud. That was the silence I drove home with after visiting Jason and Tom. The radio stayed off. The windows stayed closed. My thoughts filled every inch of the car until breathing felt like I was sharing oxygen with them. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did. Neat lawn, trimmed bushes, clean porch. A house with no visible cracks. But I had seen the cracks. I had followed them. I had touched the edges. And now they are spreading. Inside, the air felt stale, as if it had been waiting all day for me to come back and disturb it. I set my keys on the table and walked straight to the bedroom. My hand shook slightly as I reached for the box on the floor. I wasn't planning to open it again, at least not right away. Not until I had processed everything from the day. But the box had become a living thing in my mind. It hummed with a quiet energy, as if new answers had formed inside while I was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed my palms over my jeans, trying to settle the tremor in my fingers. My chest felt tight, not in a painful way, but in a pressurized way, like I was trying to breathe underwater. I wasn't sure where to start. There were too many threads, too many paths branching from each object in that box. Jason's stiff reaction, Tom's nervousness, the objects that connected to both. But something in me knew I wasn't done with the threads yet. I needed confirmation from someone who had lived closer to the truth than I had. Jason had a wife. I'd seen a picture on the wall behind the shop counter when he walked past it as a family photo. Him, his wife, and a little boy no older than 5. They looked happy. Of course they did. Photos always do. I didn't know her name. But I knew where she worked. When I had looked up the shop online, I'd noticed that its website listed about as staff members. Jason's bio mentioned that his wife, Rachel, worked in a nearby real estate office. It was just one detail among many. But now, it mattered. I found the address, grabbed my jacket, and left the house again. The real estate office sat on the corner of a quiet street, its windows decorated with photos of homes for sale, each with a smiling agent in the bottom corner. Inside, the space was warm and bright, dark wooden floors, welcoming chairs, small plants, a coffee machine humming quietly. A woman in her mid-30s with brown hair tied neatly in a low bun approached the front desk when she saw me enter. Her eyes were kind, but tired. "Hi," she said with a professional smile. "How can I help you?" My throat felt tight for a moment. I steadied myself. "Are you Rachel?" She blinked, surprised. "Yes." "Do we know each other?" "No," I said gently. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced." "My name is Mark." "Mark Hanley." Recognition didn't appear in her eyes. "Why would it?" I was a stranger. Then I added, "I think we might have something important we need to talk about." "It's about your husband." Her expression flickered in an instant, small, almost invisible. But I saw it. A subtle tightening around her eyes. A quiet dread. She glanced toward the office behind the lobby. "I have a meeting in a few minutes, I understand," I said. "But I'm not here to accuse you or hurt you. I just found something. Something I can't ignore." Her eye settled on mine for a long time. There was a softness in them, but also a sharp intelligence. Then she nodded toward a small seating area in the corner. "5 minutes," she said. "Let's talk." We sat across from each other, the table between us a small barrier that felt symbolic. She folded her hands on her lap, waiting. I took out my phone and scrolled to the photo I had taken of the box, specifically the items tied with a rubber band that included the scuffed keychain. I didn't hand her the phone immediately. I placed it gently on the table, screen down. "I don't want to make assumptions," I began, "and I'm not asking you to confirm or explain anything you're not comfortable with. But I think our lives may have crossed in a way neither of us expected." She stared at me, breathing carefully. "Just tell me." I turned the phone screen toward her. She leaned in, eyes scanning the image. At first her expression didn't change. Then slowly, her lips parted just slightly. Her face went pale. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. She looked at me not with denial, not with disbelief, but with recognition. Painful, exhausted recognition. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "This morning," I said softly. "But the signs, I guess they've been there longer. I just didn't want to see them." She nodded, swallowing. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She looked like someone who had used up her tears long ago. "I'm sorry," I said, because it felt like the only decent thing I could offer. She gave a weak, grateful smile. "Don't be. If anything, I'm sorry you have to go through this too." She took a shaky breath. "I've suspected for a while. He's been distant. Guarded. He keeps his phone like it's made of glass. And when I ask him anything, he gets defensive." Her fingers twisted the hem of her shirt. "I saw a message once. Just part of it. A name. Emily." I felt a cold wave pass through my arms. "When was that?" I asked quietly. "About 2 months ago." I confronted him, but he brushed it off. Said she was just a client. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Her voice cracked for the first time, and she breathed slowly to steady herself. But I saw the way he reacted when I mentioned her again later. He froze. I leaned back, letting her words sink into me. Hearing them spoken aloud by someone else made them heavier, more real. "You weren't imagining it," I said. She nodded miserably. "I know." She hesitated before asking, "How did you find all this?" I exhaled quietly. "There's a box in our closet." She asked me never to open it. I finally did. Rachel's face softened with a kind of sympathetic horror. I'm sorry, she said again, voice quiet. So am I answered. We sat in silence for a moment. The rest of the office hummed in the background, phones ringing softly, printers whirring, voices murmuring behind glass doors. The normalcy of it all felt surreal. Eventually, she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I'm not done understanding everything." She nodded as if she had expected that answer. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and winced. "I have to go. Meeting with clients." I stood. So did she. "Thank you," I said, genuinely. "You didn't owe me anything." "Neither did you," she replied softly. "But you came anyway." For a moment, we stood there, two strangers connected by the same wound. Then she turned and walked toward her office, her shoulders straight but her steps heavy. I left quietly, the bell above the door chiming as I walked back into the sunlight. The next thread led me back to the corporate building where Tom worked. But I didn't want to speak with him again. Instead, I drove to a small coffee shop nearby, ordered a drink I barely tasted, and watched the entrance of the office through the cafe window. I had no clear plan. Only the desire to observe, to gather what I could. I didn't need confrontation. I needed the truth. Around 1 p.m. I saw him walk out of the building with two co-workers. They chatted casually, cups of coffee in hand. Tom looked tired, distracted. He checked his phone twice in the span of a minute. One co-worker nudged him, probably joking about something. Tom forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Then, as he stepped away from the group for a moment, he glanced around. Not casually, nervously. His gaze swept the area as if he expected someone to be watching. For a moment, I felt a strange jolt when his eyes landed on the coffee shop window. I shifted behind a column instinctively, heart ticking faster. I told myself it was irrational to hide, but instinct sometimes knew more than logic. Tom looked away quickly and rejoined his co-workers. After a few more minutes, they walked back inside. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Observation confirmed what intuition had already told me, that his connection to Emily wasn't brief. It wasn't accidental. It had roots. I stayed in the cafe for another hour, thinking. Not about whether Emily had been unfaithful, I knew that now. But about how long it had been happening. How many people had been involved? How many layers of secrecy lay beneath the surface? The box had answers. But it also had gaps. Gaps that I needed to fill. When I returned home later that afternoon, I walked upstairs and carried the box onto the bed. The sunlight through the window fell across the lid, warming it. I sat beside it, hesitating before opening it again. The second layer revealed a bundle of receipts. Some from restaurants. Some from movie theaters. A few from a museum I didn't even know Emily liked. They were folded neatly, organized by date. One receipt caught my eye immediately. It was from the same weekend Emily had claimed to be at a work seminar in another city. Dinner. 2 entries. 2 drinks. I swallowed hard and set it aside. Another receipt was from a cafe near the office complex where Tom worked. A handwritten note was scribbled at the bottom of the receipt, "See you next week." Not signed. But the handwriting was familiar from other notes I'd found. I opened another section of the box and found something that made my breath catch. A small hotel keycard, white with a blue stripe. It looked almost new. On the back, someone had written a date in black ink. The date was 4 months ago. I stared at it for a long time. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. A keycard was different from tickets or receipts. It meant time. Hours. It meant something deliberate. My hands trembled faintly as I placed it back in the box. Then something unexpected caught my attention, tucked into the side of the box, almost hidden under a flap of cardboard. A small envelope. It was thinner than a letter, thicker than a receipt. I pulled it out gently. The paper was cream-colored, slightly textured. No name on the front. No writing. My fingers felt suddenly cold as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Not of Emily. Not of any man either. It was a picture of a small bakery storefront, a place I recognized instantly. Emily used to stop there on her lunch breaks. She always talked fondly about their pastries. The photo was taken on a cloudy day, the shop looking cozy and inviting. But on the back of the photo, someone had written in neat handwriting, "You always find your way here." Underneath the note was a date. And that date matched a day Emily had come home unusually happy, humming as she cooked dinner, smiling more warmly than usual. I had asked her what put her in such a good mood. She had said, "Just a good day." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred slightly. It wasn't the picture itself. It was the sentiment. The familiarity. The intimacy written in that one line. She always found her way there. With someone. I set the photo aside carefully, placing it face down. For several minutes, I didn't move. My thoughts didn't race. They didn't scream. They simply settled. Emily had built an entire world outside of me. A world made of quiet secrets, small shared moments, and people who had looked at her the way I once did. And she had kept mementos of all of it. The box wasn't a random assortment. It was a record. A careful, meticulously preserved record. Of what? Connections? Memories? Conquests? I didn't know. But I knew this: every item in that box was proof that my wife had lived a parallel life. One I had never been invited into. I placed everything back inside, layer by layer, until only the lid remained. Then I closed the box gently and rested my hand on top of it. There was no anger in me now. No confusion. No denial. Only clarity. Cold, quiet clarity. The kind that comes right before the truth becomes unavoidable. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The air in the house felt strangely thin the night Emily came home. As if the walls themselves had been holding their breath all day, waiting for the moment the two of us would meet inside the same quiet space. I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring at the box resting on the table. Its presence changed the atmosphere of the room heavily, undeniably. Her key turned in the lock. The door opened. Footsteps. She entered with her usual tired sigh, setting her purse down and kicking off her shoes with the absent-minded grace of habit. She didn't notice me right away. Her eyes were unfocused, her shoulders tense beneath her light jacket. When she finally looked up and saw me standing perfectly still beside the table, she froze. "Mark?" she said, surprised. "You're home early." "I never left," I answered. Her brow tightened, just barely. She glanced at the clock, then at my face, then finally at the box on the kitchen table. Everything in her expression changed at once. "What is that doing here?" she asked, her voice a fragile mix of alarm and forced calm. I didn't speak right away. Silence can be louder than shouting if it carries the right truth. I stepped aside so she could see the box fully, placed deliberately in the center of the wooden surface. The light overhead made its edges stark. Inescapable. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. "Mark," she said softly, "why did you touch it?" "I told you I know what you told me," I interrupted, my voice steady. "And I opened it." Her breath caught. She blinked rapidly, as if the room suddenly brightened too much. "You opened it?" "Yes," I said. "Every layer." She took a step back, her hand gripping the strap of her purse. For a moment, she looked like she might run. Not from danger, but from the truth sitting between us. "Why would you do that?" she whispered, but the question trembled with something deeper. Not indignation. Not anger. Fear. Slowly, I pulled a chair out and sat down. "Sit," I said quietly. She hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself into the chair across from me. She kept her eyes on the table, but every few seconds they flicked upward, searching my expression. I placed my palms flat on the wooden surface. "I want you to look at me." It took her a moment, but she did. I had seen Emily anxious before. Nervous. Even upset. But I had never seen this. Her eyes held layers: shame, guilt, dread, and something else I couldn't immediately name. She looked like someone standing on a collapsing bridge. "Mark," she began, her voice gentle, pleading. "Whatever you think you found, it's taken out of context." I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "Context?" I asked softly. "Then explain the context." She closed her eyes, just for a moment, as if gathering courage. When she opened them, she tried a small, shaky smile. "Those things are old memories. You know, souvenirs. Just meaningless things from before I met you." "And stop," I said gently but firmly. She froze. I reached into the box and pulled out the folded photo of her at the restaurant with the man whose face was half turned. I placed it in front of her. She didn't touch it. She just stared at the image as though it were something poisonous. "That's from before we met?" I asked. She inhaled sharply, but her eyes wouldn't leave the picture. "Mark, please." I reached into the box again, pulling out the hotel keycard with the handwritten date from 4 months ago. I set it beside the photo. Her face was drained of color. "This is before I met you?" I echoed. Her hand covered her mouth. She didn't answer. I placed the concert wristband in front of her. "This too?" Still nothing. The small note, "Wear the blue one." The cafe receipt with the message, "See you next week." Finally, the business card with the name T. Reeves scribbled on the back. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. Not yet. She sat in rigid silence, shaking slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "I can explain." I nodded slowly. "I'm listening." She took a trembling breath. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "It just happened." The word sounded like something practiced. Something she'd said before. Maybe not out loud to herself, maybe in private moments. I didn't react. I didn't interrupt. I let her continue. She wiped her cheek, though the tear hadn't fallen. I felt invisible. For a long time. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I just wanted to feel something again. Her voice trembled. And I never expected it to go so far. I studied her expression. Her shaking hands. The downward pull of her lips. The fear in her eyes. "Emily," I said quietly, "how many?" She closed her eyes. "How many?" I repeated, more firmly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." That answer opened a hollow space inside me, but the pain didn't crash over me the way I expected. It settled slowly, sinking deep. I looked at the box. "You kept everything." Her eyes snapped open. "Not everything." "Enough," I said. "Enough to fill a box. Enough to tell me exactly how long this has been happening." She swallowed. "I didn't keep them because of what they were. I kept them because I don't know. Because they made me feel like a different person. Someone who mattered. Someone who was wanted." Her voice cracked again. "Someone I wasn't." I leaned back, absorbing her words. "Why did you ask me never to open the box?" "Because I knew," she whispered. "I knew that if you ever did, everything would unravel." She clasped her hands tightly together, knuckles whitening. "Mark, I never wanted to hurt you. I swear I didn't. When we got married, I meant every word. But somewhere along the way I felt like I disappeared into your routine. Your stability. Your predictability." Her voice softened. "I felt safe with you. But I also felt invisible." I watched her carefully. And they made you feel visible? The question pierced something in her. She winced. Yes, she breathed. They did. I nodded slowly. It wasn't approved. It wasn't forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. She looked up suddenly, eyes filled with something raw. But none of them mattered, she said quickly. Not really. They were distractions. I never loved them. I never planned anything with them. I raised an eyebrow. Yet you kept their things. Their notes. Their photos. It wasn't about them, she insisted, voice rising slightly in desperation. It was about how I felt when they looked at me. When they wanted me. She stopped herself, biting her lip hard. I kept my voice calm. Tell me the truth. Every bit of it. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. It started small, she whispered. Just conversations. Flirting. Little moments I didn't think were harmful. She ran a shaky hand through her hair. Then it became meetings. Then more. I didn't react. I didn't trust myself to. Her voice broke as she continued, almost rambling. Every time, I told myself it didn't mean anything. That it would be the last time. But then someone else would show interest. And I didn't know how to stop. She pressed her hands to her temples. I'm not a bad person, Mark. I swear I'm not. I breathed slowly. I didn't say you were. But you made bad choices. She lowered her hands and searched my face desperately. I can change, she whispered. I want to change. Just give me a chance. Her plea lingered in the air. It was the same kind of plea someone makes when the ground beneath them finally gives way. I wanted to feel something: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but what I felt instead was an overwhelming quiet. Emily, I said calmly. Look at me. She lifted her gaze, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I spoke to people today. Her breath hitched violently. Who? Their families, I said gently. Some of them. Her hand flew to her chest. Mark, no, would you do that? Because that's what truth does, I said quietly. It doesn't stay neatly folded in boxes. It spreads. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You don't understand. You're going to ruin everything. Their jobs. Their marriages. I leaned forward. You already did. The words hit her harder than anything else I'd said. She flinched as if struck. I'm not doing anything, I continued. I'm not inventing lies. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not manipulating anything. I'm simply showing people the reality you created. Tears finally broke free, trailing down her cheeks. Mark, please don't do this. I didn't do anything, I repeated gently. You did. She dropped her face into her hands, shoulders shaking as she finally cried. Not softly. Not delicately. But openly, painfully, like someone who had run out of lies to protect herself. I let her cry. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red, her voice a broken whisper. Can we fix this? I took a slow breath. Fixing something means it's broken in a way that can be repaired, I said softly. But this isn't a crack, Emily. It's the foundation. She stared at me as if she didn't recognize me. Or maybe she recognized exactly who I was now, someone she could no longer bend, distract, or soothe with apologies. I stood and closed the box gently. We'll talk again, I said. But not tonight. She stood suddenly, reaching for me with trembling hands. Mark, I love you, she gasped. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do. Her fingers touched my arm. I stepped back. The slightest movement. But it broke something inside her. Please, she whispered, as though begging gravity itself to reverse. Please don't walk away. I looked at her for a long moment. I'm not walking away, I said quietly. I'm stepping back so I can see clearly. Her face crumpled. I turned, picked up the box, and carried it out of the kitchen. Each step felt like wading through something thick and heavy. I didn't slam doors. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply walked to the bedroom, placed the box on the dresser, and closed the door gently behind me. For the first time since opening that box, the truth inside me felt steady. Not easy. Not painless. But steady. Emily stayed downstairs for a long time, crying softly into her hands, whispering things I couldn't hear. I didn't go to comfort her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed box, feeling the weight of everything that had been said and everything still waiting to be said. Truth had entered our house. And nothing would ever be the same again. There is a moment, just before dawn, when the world feels undecided. The sky hovers between night and morning, shadows and light blending together, and for a few minutes the day has not yet made up its mind about what it will become. That's what the weeks after the confrontation felt like, standing in a muted, uncertain space where nothing had fully started and nothing had fully ended. Emily and I still lived in the same house, but everything between us existed in a strange suspension. We moved around each other like cautious ghosts, speaking only when necessary, avoiding the topics that mattered most. She was quieter, gentler, almost timid. She tried to cook dinner more often, left small notes on the fridge like she used to in the early days, smiled with a softness that felt rehearsed. But I saw her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking tired, waited, searching for something she couldn't find anymore. One evening, about 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen, she approached me while I sat at the dining table sorting through mail. She stood near the doorway, hands clasped together, and cleared her throat softly. "Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk?" I set the letters aside, folding my hands on the table. "We can talk." She took a hesitant step forward. "I've been thinking. About everything. About us. About what I did." Her breath hitched slightly. "I want to fix it. I want to try. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I studied her face. She believed what she was saying at that moment. I could see it. But belief wasn't enough. "Emily," I said gently, "you keep talking about fixing things. But you still haven't told me why you kept all of it." She flinched, the way someone flinches when a bruise is touched unexpectedly. After a long silence, she sank into the chair opposite mine. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe I wanted to feel like those moments were real. That someone saw me. That someone wanted me." I let the quiet settle around her words. She swallowed hard. "It wasn't about them. It was about me. The me I thought I'd lost." I nodded slowly. "I believe you." She blinked, startled. "You do?" "Yes." I leaned back slightly. "But believing why it happened doesn't undo what it did." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "I know," she whispered. "But can't we build something new?" I sighed softly. Not out of impatience, out of the weariness that comes when you finally accept a truth you've been trying to avoid. "We could build something new," I said. "But it wouldn't be us. It would be two different people trying to imitate who we used to be." She shook her head quickly, a desperate reflex. "We can be better. We can start over." "Emily," I said quietly, "you didn't keep the box to let go of the past. You kept it because you didn't want to." Her breath trembled. "And I can't build a future with someone whose past still has a seat at the table." That was the moment her tears finally fell. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders trembling. I waited, giving her space to breathe. When she looked up again, her eyes were red, her voice broken. "Are you saying it's over?" I didn't answer right away. I let myself feel the weight of the question. Let myself acknowledge the ache in my chest. The sadness. The disappointment. The exhaustion. Finally, I nodded. "Yes," I said softly. "It's over." She lowered her head, covering her face with both hands. I stayed seated, watching the woman I had loved unravel in front of me, not out of cruelty or coldness, but because there was nothing left for me to hold on to. The foundation had cracked beyond repair long before either of us admitted it. When she finally composed herself enough to speak, her voice came out as a faint, fragile breath. "What happens now?" I looked at the table, at the small scratches from years of shared dinners, spilled drinks, laughter. "We separate. We file. We move on." She breathed in sharply, as if the air itself had turned cold. "And the box?" I looked at her then, really looked. The fear in her eyes wasn't about losing the objects. It was about losing the narrative she had built around them. The part of her that felt seen, admired, desired. "It won't stay here," I said. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. "Do you hate me?" "No," I answered honestly. "I don't hate you. But I can't live in a story where I'm the only one who didn't know what role I was playing." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For everything." "I know," I said, "and I meant it. And I hope you find the help you need. The kind that doesn't come from strangers' attention." A quiet, wounded sound escaped her throat. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Just pain. Real pain. The kind that comes when someone sees you clearly for the first time and it isn't flattering. The next morning, she packed a few bags and left to stay with her sister. The house felt too large after she walked out, her absence echoing through rooms that had once felt full. But the space didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. A week later, I stood in front of the courthouse, holding a manila envelope with the divorce papers inside. The weather was mild, the sky open and pale blue. People passed by, talking, laughing, living. Inside the building, the process was calm, bureaucratic. A few signatures. A handful of polite nods. Legal language that felt clinical compared to everything that had led me there. When I walked back out onto the courthouse steps, the sunlight hit my face, warm and steady. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't broken. I was simply breathing. For the first time in months, maybe years, my lungs felt full. The following weekend, I carried the box to the garage. Not to hide it. Not to bury it. To end it. I opened it one last time, not to examine the items but to acknowledge them. Objects with stories I would never fully know. Objects that had once held meaning for someone who had stopped seeing meaning in us. I placed the lid back on, carried the box to the trash bin outside, and gently lowered it in. The thud it made was soft but final. I stood there for a moment, looking at the bin. The box that had lived so long in the shadows of my closet was now just another piece of waste waiting to be taken away. It felt fitting. When I walked back toward the house, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt like something had been lifted. That afternoon, I drove to the park near the lake, the one Emily and I used to visit when we first moved in together. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching ripples move slowly across the surface. The breeze ruffled the leaves. Children laughed in the distance. Life continued, uncomplicated by secrets or silent aches. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden lines across the water, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The box. The men. The lies. The confrontation. The clarity. And now, the quiet. The truth hadn't made me happy. But it has made me free. And sometimes, freedom is the first step toward something better, even if you don't know what that better looks like yet. I watched the sky shift colors as the sun set, feeling a sense of stillness settle inside me steadier than I'd felt in months. Maybe years. When the first stars appeared, I whispered something to the fading light, not out of bitterness but acceptance. I'm still here. Not broken. Not angry. Just here. And for now, that was enough.